Okay, so I've been thinking about what other people who've heard me talk on this have taken to calling mattering theory. I hadn't given it such a pompous name, actually, but have to say, I think it fits. What's it about? It's about the human longing to matter. What we are, we humans, are creatures of matter who long to matter. We are matter that would matter. And I think in that one word, mattering, are all of my obsessions. It has to do with matter, because I'd started out in physics, and that was my major obsession, to figure out the nature of matter and how it can produce consciousness. And then, it's not an accident that we have this normative concept, to matter. This verb, which is normative, it entails obligations. And it comes from that word, matter. And I think, the first half of my career was very given over to the first meaning, the noun meaning, to matter. And now it seems that the remainder of my career has been very devoted to the second meaning, the verb meaning, to matter, and how we came to be creatures who care so much about what matters and who matters, and in particular, whether one's own self matters. And so you see, there are really two radically different kinds of meanings for the word matter. You don't have that in German. This is a peculiarity of our English language. One matter deals with stuff that's out there, and the other matter deals with what it means to matter, what it means to be meaningful. And this second kind of matter has to do with the story of what makes us human, the fundamentals, the psychosocial foundation of humanity. Yeah, it's a big claim, and I've been working towards it for a very long time, working out all the details. In fact, I was first led to this notion of the will to matter by one of my fictional characters. My editor asked me a question regarding a particular character of mine, a young woman named Renee Foyer, who was a protagonist in my first novel, The Mind-Body Problem. My editor said, "I don't understand Renee. She's so attractive and she's so intelligent, and yet she's always so unhappy, always on the verge of despair. Why?" And so I thought about my editor's question, or rather, I had Renee Foyer think about it. And because Renee was not as rigorous a philosopher as I was, in fact, that was a large part of her problem, she was a graduate student in a rigorous philosophy department, and she couldn't hack it. She ended up coming up with these very complicated ideas about mattering. In fact, Renee became quite the theoretician of mattering. And so I'm going to let her explain it. Quote, "To matter, not to be as naught. Is there any human will deeper than that? It's not just unqualified will, as Schopenhauer would have it, that makes us what we are. Nor is it the will to power, as Nietzsche had theorized, but something deeper, of which the will to power is merely a manifestation. We want power because we want to matter. The will to create, to procreate, these two are expressions of the will to matter, deeper even than the will to survive. We don't want to live when we become convinced that we don't, can't, or will never matter. We'll even give up our lives to a cause if we become convinced that that's what it takes for us to matter. It seems no sooner do we discover that we are than we desperately want that which we are to matter." End quote. In fact, I do think that it's a strange uniqueness of our species that the achievements that we can lay claim to, as well as the atrocities that we can lay claim to, all derive from the same deep longing in each of us to matter. It takes so much energy and concentration to pursue a human life, and it has to matter to you. I mean, any living creature has to pay a lot of attention to itself in order to survive and to flourish. And it has to care tremendously about its own flourishing. And we're programmed for that. All living creatures are, you know, from the grass growing up through the concrete to all of us. I think it's brought to us by the largeness of our brains that didn't develop for this reason. It's a spandrel, as they say, of evolution, the big brain, the cognitive niche that we fill, the fact that we can step outside our lives and look at our lives. That's the whole sense of the absurdity that the existentialists wax so eloquent about when they say, "What am I doing here? Do I have any purpose? Is there any meaning? Do I really matter? And what can I do to make myself matter?" Am I like a dog chasing its own tail here? I mean, is life really just absurd? We have a tremendous longing that our life not be absurd. I think that the will to matter, the desire to matter, the instinct for mattering is at the heart of so much human behavior, so much that is most laudable about us, as well as at the heart of so much that is most frightening, atrocious, terrifying about us. And I believe that people in general, as soon as the basic survival needs have been met for themselves and the ones they love, want to believe that their lives matter. They pursue their lives as if they matter. They care about their lives. And they come up with these various theories as to why they matter. And these are the kinds of views that help shape their lives, their goals, their projects. And you know, the notion of mattering is intimately linked with the notion of attention. It's not surprising that many people try to derive their sense of mattering by acquiring a great deal of attention, even from perfect strangers. I call this the mattering instinct. And I believe that it's this that leads to religions and to various ideologies, to people even willing to give up their lives if they believe that's what's going to make them matter. But it also leads to our endeavors in science and art and social activism. And so I'm thinking about this mattering instinct and the ways that it works for us, as well as the ways that it works against us, the ways it can be dangerous. And I think that a lot of moral questions can be answered in terms of mattering theory. But before going any further, let's pause for a moment to consider the beguiling polysemy, the coexistence of multiple possible meanings, compressed within the word matter. As a noun, matter signifies the stuff, that composes all the things out there in the world. Sticks and stones, brains and vats, moons and cream cheese. The concept of matter is kind of a placeholder for what that stuff is like. And it's the science of physics that tells us what that stuff is like. Its subatomic structure, convertibility into energy, and the like. Whatever its details, matter is, by definition, quintessentially objective, meaning that it exists independent of perception. If you doubt whether a tree falling in the forest makes a sound when there's nobody there to hear it, then you doubt the existence of matter. But when we transition to the verb to matter, we are smack within the human perspective, drawing distinctions regarding what and whom we ought to care about. That's what the verb signifies, and it's applied to both things and people. To say that something or someone matters is to say that we ought to care about them. And when you assert your own mattering, you're asserting that your existence presents circumstances that ought to motivate an attitude of appropriate attentiveness on the part of others. Thank you. We can't help feeling both that we categorically matter and, at the same time, feel compelled to demonstrate that we matter. This compulsion and the choices that we make responding to it are what individually define us. Our striving to matter somehow or other is common to us all. It's in that somehow or other that we differ so drastically as to often amuse, amaze, baffle, or sometimes horrify one another. Just as the language instinct generates the great diversity of languages in the world, so too the mattering instinct generates all the passions and projects to which people dedicate their lives. George Eliot, Albert Einstein, Eleanor Roosevelt, and, I dare say, even Donald J. Trump. Yes, the very best of our species and the very worst can be found in the diversity of responses to the mattering instinct. Which means that yes, not all ways of responding are equally good, neither psychologically in terms of the sense of happiness and well-being they provide, nor ethically. I mean, if I feel that the only way for me to categorically demonstrate that I matter is to invade Poland, well then, And so we see these various projects, and that's where the great diversity among us enters in. Diversity that often causes a great deal of hostility among us, because there's so much riding on it, so much emotional intensity is riding on it. These projects that we form, whether secular or religious, intellectual or artistic, or simply the devotion to the people that we love, whatever it is, these all have a justificatory role to play in our lives, which are ultimately all revolving around trying to demonstrate that we matter. And so, you see, we can't pursue our lives without thinking that our lives matter. In fact, it is inconceivable to pursue a human life without assuming that your life matters, at least to some extent. The entire repertoire of our emotions is the means that natural selection has given us in order to monitor how our lives are going. Emotions such as, thank you, happiness, sorrow, hope, frustration, disappointment, gratification, fear, embarrassment, pride, shame, remorse, gratitude, longing, love, hatred, worry, relief, jealousy, envy, anger, humiliation, insecurity, resentment, betrayal, dread, desperation, resignation, despair, emotions are our way of measuring our progress on our major task in life, which is to persist and to flourish in the face of all obstacles, the same as it is for all organisms. And if our emotional repertoire is more complicated than that of other animals, and it's because our lives are more complicated, with many more opportunities to flourish, as well as, even more plentifully, to fail. And if there are many more names for negative emotions than positive ones, and there are, blame the second law of thermodynamics, which yields far more ways for our lives to go wrong than right. Everything goes towards chaos. Everything goes towards randomness. And so, an individual thing, even a complicated thing like us, just in order to resist entropy, has got to be striving. If an organism, any organism, were to have the capacity to articulate its deepest motivation, the one that drives it on in its ceaseless tasks and activities, its scurrying and hiding and roaming and raiding and mating, it would say that its own existence in this world, its persistence and its flourishing, matters. Every creature's own life deserves the assiduous attention and dedicated activity that it unthinkingly gives it, for as long as it is what it is. In fact, clinical depression is when you're convinced that you don't and will never matter. That's a pathological attitude, and it highlights by its pathology the way that the mattering instinct normally functions. There's even a website for the prevention of suicide entitled You Matter. That's just how fundamental it is to our mental health, to believe that our life matters, that you matter at least as much as other people. And that is one thing that religion actually does. I mean, it makes you feel like you matter in the universe. But nowadays, with the decline of religion, I mean, what is it being replaced with? The love of money? The love of fame? How many followers you've got on YouTube or Instagram? I mean, those are just not options that are open to many people. So now we have the disintegration of family and of community and of democratic participation. And you don't really feel like you're a part of much of anything now, do you? And that's why I believe that mattering is really a social justice issue. And so, a very natural way for us to validate that we matter is to be paid attention to. And you see it with children. I mean, I have this grandchild, and I went to see him when he was like 1 month old, and he just started making this eye contact with me. And I mean, he just wants to know that you can see him. But in terms of our neurophysiology, we actually have neurons that are dedicated to knowing exactly when someone is looking directly at you. A few centimeters to the side, and those neurons won't fire. So we are very attuned to being paid attention to. To be a fully functioning, non-depressed person is to live and to act, to take it for granted that you can act on your own behalf and to pursue your own goals and your projects. And it is to believe that you have the right to be treated in accord with your own commitment to your life mattering. That's what I mean by the mattering instinct, that commitment to one's own life that is inseparable from pursuing a coherent human life. And so, as I've said, one of the ways in which we can try to demonstrate our mattering, what really, really matters, is to try to matter to others, and for others to matter to us. Where the mattering instinct can go wrong, however, is when we become convinced that what matters to us should matter greatly to all. I've got this image I call the mattering map. Basically, it's like the description of one's own personal mattering landscape. Where we are is what matters most to us. We each have our own map, but sometimes we can't see outside of our own mattering maps, and we have a great deal of difficulty believing that someone else's map could look differently than our own. And this leads to us being upset or combative or defensive when we simply need to do a better job of putting ourselves into others' shoes. So it helps to step back and take in the larger perspective. I mean, it's good to gain perspective on these sorts of things, and it helps to realize that there's no absolute value to the area of the mattering map which you happen to occupy, by reason of your talents and your individual traits and your history. Look, I'm a philosopher and a writer. It matters to me that I think well and that I write well. I could feel like I don't matter, to the point of genuine depression, because others think better or write better than I do. I could even want to put the gun to my head because I'm not the most brilliant philosopher of my generation. But to the guy situated in the next mattering region over, philosophy doesn't matter in the least. The whole thing's a waste of time. He's got the gun to his head because he's not the most brilliant physicist of his generation, not the most brilliant speed skater of his generation, or not the greatest actor of his generation, or because he's losing his fabulous looks. I think that mattering to others also functions in another way, and that is that for most of our projects, we need others to validate, to adjudicate that what we're doing actually matters, that it's actually important. And this varies, of course, from project to project. You know, it all comes down to the oldest question. What is it to live a life that's worthy of a human being to live? I have a great desire to live as well as I possibly can, to devote myself to a project that can matter, that can perhaps help others in this tremendous trial of what it is to live a human life. And even though I know that nothing is absolute and nothing is forever, I'm still going to try to flourish, and I'm not going to give up. A common way that people arrive at their sense of mattering is to convince themselves that they matter more than others. Just as some can't rustle up a feeling of mattering without believing in cosmic mattering, that is, that they matter to the universe or to God, Many can't achieve the requisite sense of mattering without feeling that they matter more than others. Call it comparative mattering. Believers believe that the content of their beliefs renders them superior to all those who believe otherwise. The unconverted, the unsaved, the unchosen, the infidels, the heretics who interpret some line of some holy book this way instead of that way. Attaining an adequate sense of mattering by measuring yourself against others and concluding that you matter more is quite common. For example, being richer, smarter, stronger, classier, sexier, better looking, better dressed, better connected, better born, more famous, more athletic, more literate, more scientific, more sociable, more mathematical, more artistic, more beloved, more authoritative, more self-sacrificing. The list goes on and on. All the ideological biases most of us, finally learned to recognize and, in principle, denounce, fall under the rubric of categorical mattering of the comparative kind. One race matters more. One gender matters more. The rich and/or powerful matter more. Citizens residing in powerful nations matter more. Those related to me matter more. The young matter more. The able-bodied matter more. The good-looking matter more. The citizens of one's own country matter more. Those whose sexual practices could lead to procreation matter more. The laborious moral progress that we've made over the centuries has consisted in undermining one by one these ideological claims to comparative mattering. The stubborn persistence of so many of them, like racism, the way that once caught out, they may retreat but aren't entirely extinguished, attests to their being sourced by the powerful mattering instinct. You know, the more I think about these things, the more sympathy I have for just what it is to be human. As foolish and often egregious the mistakes are that we make in trying to prove our mattering. And I think that many of the greatest horrors of history come from egregious fallacies of this sort. And so, since the conditions that give rise to our irrepressible sense of mattering, as well as to our agonizing over it, are universally shared, it's hard to escape the conclusion that, when it comes to mattering, we're all in the same boat. And this leaves us with two possibilities. Either none of us matters, and our sense that we do is some sort of illusion caused by existential pressures, or we all matter, and to the exact same extent. And which of these two possibilities is true hardly matters, ethically speaking, because the consequence of both is the same. And if anything at all, ought to matter to us, then surely it is that. Thank you.